Hello everyone, and welcome to Dutch Greybeard. During my last monthly wrap-up, I revisited my reading month of August. At that time, some sort of pressure started creeping into my enjoyment of reading books. I started looking anxiously at the calendar, hoping that I'd be able to finish reading this or that book. Also, I picked up shorter books to, not so covertly, try to boost my numbers. This is something I definitely want to avoid. I read to enrich myself, not to win any kind of race. So I stepped away from the monthly obligation and will inform my readers of what I've been reading whenever I feel like it, which is now. In this video, I'll be covering the 8 books and 1 short story that I've read the last 72 days. The total page count during this period from September 1st to November 11th is 3,247. I also stepped away from the rating in 5 stars because that felt too constricted to me. I now use the scale from 1 to 100. My lowest rating this past period was 70 out of 100 and my highest rating was 94 out of 100. The average rating for this period comes to 84 out of 100, which is pretty decent. Most books I read were just very, very good. So, let's dive into the books. At the beginning of September, I read Elantris by Sanderson. This book of 622 pages took me 8 days to read. I very much enjoyed it, although I did have some points of critique. For instance, some of the characters are quite stereotypical, and here and there the storytelling lacked credibility for me. But overall the story is very entertaining, and as always with Sanderson, the magic system is absolutely intriguing. This book I gave 82 out of 100. I did a reading experience video with spoilers that you can either check out here, if the link will appear, or you can look it up through the link in the description below. I then read the short story The Hope of Elantris, which I liked. It was nice to have a different viewpoint of a pivotal event that takes place in the novel, and the writer shows great ability to portray a gripping scene in very few words. But as with most short stories, it is simply too short for me to get invested in characters or the story itself. Therefore, I can rate this one not higher than 70 out of 100. Next, I started reading a new series, The Broken Earth by N.K. Jemisin. I did a reading experience on the 3 books with a non-spoiler and a spoiler section. The first book, the 5th season, is 468 pages long and I needed 11 days to finish it. From the get-go, I was in love with the writing. The story, the characters and the world building were superb to me. Although the story itself was very bleak, that it was almost depressing at times. I was mostly impressed by the way Miss Jemisin plotted a character twist, which I cannot explain here for spoiler reasons. If you want to know what I'm talking about, check out my reading experience of the entire trilogy. I gave the 5th season 91 out of 100. I straight away continued with the second book, The Obelisk, which is 410 pages long. For 8 days, I was immersed in the continuation of this magnificent story. This book was the easiest to read in the trilogy. The first book took some time getting used to. For instance, the chapters of Esun, the main character, are written in second person, you. Also, the way the world works took some adjusting. In the Obelisk Gate, these hurdles were already taken. Maybe that is why I rated this book just a bit higher with 93 out of 100. The final installment in this series, The Stone Sky, is 416 pages long. This one took me 16 days to finish. I'm a slow reader. Even though I find this the best one in the series, it was also the most challenging one. More so than in the 5th season, I was lost. During certain chapters that are set in the extreme past, I initially didn't know what was going on. These chapters feel like they are set in an entirely different world, with people who have different abilities and so forth. I had to reacquaint myself all over again. Still, the apotheosis is so worth it. Everything comes together, even though the writer doesn't explain all of it. I even understood why the Essun chapters are written in that second-person narrative. Very fulfilling, and I fully see why all 3 books in this series have won a Hugo Award. This final book in the series I rated 94 out of 100. I then returned to Brandon Sanderson with The Emperor's Soul, his much-praised novella that is set in the world of Elantris. The 113 pages in my edition took me 2 days, or rather 2 sittings, to finish. I love this story about Shai, who is a prisoner but still gets to do the job of her lifetime. What I like most about this book is that here, for the first time, I detected a deeper intent behind the narrative. Storytelling still remains the biggest imperative for this writer, but now I glimpsed a story or message behind the story, which gives it an extra dimension for me. I recognized a huge homage to art as a way of life, perhaps even as the reason for our existence. It's only because of its modest length that I rate this novella 81 out of 100. Inspired by the most impressive scene in The Stone Sky, I picked up a book by Jules Verne, Journey to the Center of the Earth. The 185 pages in small print kept me occupied for 8 days. This for me was mainly a study in the history of fantasy. I did not expect to be amazed by exquisite storytelling or scientific novelties. It was published in 1864. I was curious as to how I would experience reading one of the founding fathers of fantasy or science fiction. I found it highly entertaining, but the story was laughably naive to my modern eyes. Because of this being more of an academic read for me, I won't give this book a rating. Then I impulsively picked up the 4th book in Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, titled So Long, and Thanks for All the Fish. I read the only 167 pages within 5 days, or again 5 sittings. After the deception of the 3rd book, I wasn't expecting much, but I was pleasantly surprised. It's a very funny book and almost as good as the first one in the series. I will be finishing this series most certainly this year. After reading Mostly Harmless, the last book Adams wrote in this series, I'll do a reading experience video on the 5 books altogether. My rating for this one, 76 out of 100. And finally, yesterday I finished reading Knife of Dreams, the 11th book in the Wheel of Time. I carried this book of 843 pages around with me for about 27 days, although I believe that I read the final 400 pages in 4 days. I'm working on a video in which I will recap my reading experience of the first 12 books, that is, including the prequel novel, New Spring. These are the books Robert Jordan himself wrote, while the final 3, as you probably know, were written by Brandon Sanderson. But this book was a relief after the disappointment of Crossroads of Twilight. It still cannot compete with the first 6 or 7 books, but it's a huge step up compared to books like The Path of Daggers or, as I mentioned, The Crossroads of Twilight. There is finally something really interesting happening again in the story. Now I'll only have to read the final 3 books, which are said to be very good again. Looking forward to that very much. I rated Knife of Dreams 84 out of 100. I'll soon pick up The Gathering Storm number 12 in the series. But in the meantime, I've begun reading Assassin's Apprentice, the first book in the realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. I'm about 100 pages in now and am loving it. This will read 10 times faster than The Wheel of Time. That's my wrap-up over the last 72 days of reading. Thank you very much for watching this video. Until we meet again at Dutch Greybeard.